A portion of Young's blood atonement doctrine was focused upon apostates, those supposedly going against Brigham's view of things. Men in the spirit of apostasy were to be killed before they could commit further sin in order to save their soul. Others already in apostasy were to have their blood shed, which entitled them to a new probation in eternity. Elder Jeremiah M. Grant was a counselor in the first presidency after Willard Richards died. He was sometimes called Brigham's sledgehammer for his fiery speeches. In the 1856 Reformation movement, he taught,
"The Lord God commanded to not pity the person whom they killed, but to execute the law of God upon persons worthy of death. This should be done by the entire congregation, showing no pity. I wish we were in a situation to keep God's law without any contaminating influence of Gentile laws, that the people of God might lay the axe to the root of the tree and hew down every tree that did not bring forth good fruit. Putting to death the transgressors would exhibit the law of God. Do not traitors to earthly governments forfeit their life? But people will argue that we can try them on, but not for property or life. That makes the devil laugh, etc."
Jeremiah M. Grant, Tabernacle Sermon, March 12, 1854. His son was Heber J. Grant, and later church president. One policy Young put in place at this time persists today, though in milder form. It featured 2 home missionaries, now called home teachers, assigned to each ward. They were equipped with a 27-page questionnaire to judge the worthiness of the saints interviewed. Its purpose was control. The questions addressed everything from hygiene and church attendance to obeying the 10 Commandments, and of course, one's support of polygamy. Rebaptism marked the formal end of Young's 1856 Reformation movement, though its reform fervor continued through mid-1858. It was very much tied to Young's version of the church. There were and are a number of significant doctrines taught to the saints that came from President Young. Some of them have since been repudiated by the modern LDS Church and its leaders. Their removal negates the claim that mortal leaders, the arm of flesh, cannot and will not lead us astray. 5 of Young's early teachings now removed include the Blood Atonement Doctrine, leading to many murders, repudiated 1889. Spiritual wifery, the U.S. government forced the LDS Church to stop this practice in 1890. The Adam God theory, repudiated by 1902. The ban on blacks receiving the priesthood and participating in temple rites, removed in 1979. Blood oath penalties and other Freemasonry influences added to the endowment, removed in 1990. Like polygamy, Young's blood atonement doctrine survived until the turn of the century. It suggested that forgiveness for certain sins comes only through the sinner's shedding his blood. Many believe this led to many murders in Utah Territory and the Mountain Meadows Massacre, all under Young's direction. President Young delighted in the fact that he had ruthless men that could carry out his wishes whenever violence was necessary. Addressing blood atonement sent upon his enemies, Young said,
"And if the Gentiles wish to see a few tricks, we have Mormons that can perform them. We have the meanest devils on the earth in our midst, and we intend to keep them, for we have use for them. And if the devil does not look sharp, we will cheat him out of them at the last, for they will reform and go to heaven with us."
These enforcers, strikers, or hitmen included former Danite and bodyguard to Joseph Smith, Orrin Porter Rockwell, Danite Hosea Stout, Chief of Police at Nauvoo, and Bill Hickman, Young's primary hitman in Utah. Hickman openly admitted to carrying out many murders for Brigham Young in Utah Territory in 1871. A U.S. Marshal indicted Young for ordering one of many murders. No trial was ever held in connection with this indictment. Judge McKean wrote to U.S. Attorney General George H. Williams in the fall of 1873 complaining that he could neither convict the guilty in Utah Territory nor protect the innocent, and that the area had become a theocratic state under the vice-regency of Brigham Young.
Now take a person in this congregation who has knowledge with regard to being saved, and suppose that he is overtaken in a gross fault, that he has committed a sin that he knows will deprive him of that exaltation which he desires, and that he cannot attain to it without the shedding of blood, and also knows that by having his blood shed he will atone for that sin, and be saved and exalted with the gods. Is there a man or woman in this house but what would say, shed my blood that I may be saved and exalted with the gods? There are sins that men commit for which they cannot receive forgiveness in this world, or in that which is to come. And if they had their eyes open to see their true condition, they would be perfectly willing to have their blood spilt upon the ground, that the smoke thereof might ascend to heaven as an offering for their sins, and the smoking incense would atone for their sins. Whereas, if such is not the case, they will stick to them and remain upon them in the spirit world. I was opposed to hanging. Even if a man kill another, I will shoot him or cut off his head, spill his blood on the ground, and let the smoke thereof ascend up to God. And if I ever have the privilege of making a law on that subject, I will have it so. I say, rather than the apostates flourish here, I will unsheathe my bowie knife and conquer or die. Now you nasty apostates, clear out, or judgment will be put to the line and righteousness to the plummet. If you say it is right, raise your hands. Let us call upon the Lord to assist us in this and every good work.
There are many other public statements by Young tied to his blood atonement doctrine. Young inserted another relative to this false doctrine in the early temple endowment. It later came to be known as the Oath of Vengeance. It was removed in the early 1930s. The blood oath penalties, very similar to those in Freemasonry, were removed in 1990. The Oath of Vengeance was focused on avenging the blood of Joseph and Hiram. The prophet Joseph Smith employed Orrin Porter Rockwell as an early bodyguard. Later on, Brigham Young put Rockwell to work for him in this capacity too. Young also used him, Hosea Stout, Bill Hickman, and other men to eliminate threats to his power. This often involved murder. All three men have been called avenging angels, destroying angels, strikers, or members of Brigham's posse. Rockwell and Stout were early Danite enforcers, but Hickman was Young's chief hitman in Utah Territory later on. Orrin Porter Rockwell did not keep a record of his work, but Hosea Stout and Bill Hickman did. They provide useful first-hand contemporary evidence of the dark side of Brigham Young and the secret combination he led in Nauvoo and later on in Salt Lake City. These men kept King Brigham in power and wealth, surrounded by his many wives. They also shielded Young and others from justice. Like Young, Hickman never served prison time for murder, and all of them but Rockwell were polygamists too. Stout ended up with 6 wives, Hickman 10. William Hickman's story is especially revealing. He wrote it himself as a type of confession for his many murders in connection with his early devotion to Young's leadership and his eventual realization that his zeal to support Young was misplaced, a form of idolatry. Young's murderous ways were closely tied to his blood atonement doctrine. Though Hickman devoted much of his life in serving President Young as his enforcer, Young never paid him a cent. He also deserted Hickman in the end. William Bill Hickman eventually left Utah and the church, dying penniless, sick, and alone. His confession reveals regret for his deception in blindly following Young. Select statements by Hickman hereafter reveal this and more. Editor John Beadle put them together in his book, Bill Hickman, Brigham Young's Destroying Angel. William Bill Hickman was a convert to Mormonism at Nauvoo. He had a sincere desire to follow church leaders early on. He was especially impressed with the prophet Joseph Smith. Speaking of him, Hickman quoted the prophet Joseph as saying, "Now, brethren and friends, if any of you have anything against me, come and tell me, and I will make it right. Do not be backward. Come publicly or privately, and see if I didn't satisfy you or anyone that has anything against me." Hickman noted a significant difference between Joseph and Brigham. He continued, "In the fall, Brigham Young assumed authority, but with many it was no go. They would say, 'He is no prophet. He was not called of God, nor ordained by the prophet Joseph.' I became more personally acquainted with him afterwards, and soon became satisfied he was no such man as Smith, and really came to the conclusion that he, was a curse sent upon us, that we were not worthy to have so good a man as Smith to preside over us." Hickman later followed Brigham Young west. He said Young told him and other enforcers to take the property of those murdered and divide it among yourselves, which we did. Here let me say that this is all I ever got for services rendered on Brigham Young's orders. Neither did I ever receive a present from him, not so much as $1. But from the cause of my former belief I questioned nothing, supposing him right in all things, and if not only a duty, but highly necessary that I should obey his commands. And in the end it would prove both spiritual and temporal salvation to me, which situations thousands of others are now in this territory. Here Hickman admitted his deception tied to idolatry. Hickman was deceived and used. In the end, Young abandoned him. Disillusioned after years of service to Young and leaving behind Utah and the church, Hickman stated, "The night before I left, one of my boys, being out, was chased by this same gang, 3 men sent by Young to kill him, to prevent him from talking, thinking I suppose it was me. Now those watching me were men with whom I had never had any difficulty, but were of that kind that would kill father or son at the bidding of Brigham Young. This may seem strange, but there are plenty such in this country that believe they would be doing God's service to obey. If Brigham told them to kill their own son, or the son to kill the father, for 2 reasons. One, for obeying that great command of Brigham, and have nerve enough to do the deed. Another, that the man had done something that his blood should be shed to atone for his sins, and it thereby would be the means of salvation to the murdered man, and honor and a promise of greater exaltation in the world to come to the slayer." In Hickman's statements we see the same idolatry that led the saints into polygamy, and the murderous blood atonement doctrine of Young. Faith and trust is better placed in the living God and his ways. Continuing, Hickman stated, "But let me here say that this is all Brigham Young's doctrine. I have never heard of any such thing until I had been here several years. Those doctrines of shedding a man's blood to save, Adam being God, and several other abominable things of like character have originated solely from Brigham. Obedience to the requirements of the gospel as set forth, taught, and understood heretofore by the Mormons have almost entirely been set aside, and the general teaching is and has been to obey Brigham Young's counsel and that of his bishop. Many is the time that at public meetings the people have been taught that the Bible, Testament, and other books of the former Mormon faith were of no use, that those things were good enough in the time of them. But now we have the living oracles with us, Brigham and the 12, and that all divine record was of no more use to us than an old newspaper. Brother Brigham was our Savior and would lead us to heaven. He held the power of salvation for all in his own hands, and had his officers who administered, such as bishops, etc. The great and all-important teaching to the people is, obey your bishops and pay your tithings, and you are sure of being saved. This may seem strange to those who have never heard of such things before, but I assure you there are hundreds in this territory who are sanguine in this belief even now. And as for Mormonism, there is nothing in this country. It is all Brighamism, and should be called so. Looking back in regret, Hickman stated, "I would rather have died a dozen deaths than to pass through what I have, if I could only be alive again and see right and justice triumph. I think it right to come out and show the damnable course pursued by Brigham Young, guilty as I have made myself, and with no excuse to offer except my fanatical belief. Believe me or not, I was sincere. Oh my God. If any of my brethren, or used to be anyhow, in Utah think they can break the laws of heaven or this free government and Brigham will take care of them, let them come and see me here, lonely and no show to do anything for my family, and scarred all over my body, lame and old, and poor when I was once rich and hated by man, and my life threatened if I stir away from this post. I might go into detail of family affairs, women in polygamy, property appropriations, thievings, and when, how, and by whom ordered, and the consequences when not ordered, and many other atrocious deeds of murder done by the order of Brigham Young, which I was not witness to, all of which would make a larger book than this. The day is coming fast, yes, in Utah, that you will know the things set down in this book for truth." Book editor John Hanson Beadle recorded many of Hickman's most notable murders for Young in the appendix of his book. Beadle stated, "I have submitted to the reader only the most important and smallest part of the corroborative evidence of murders by Hickman via Young. As Utah affairs have been my study for years, a few may desire to know my opinion of Hickman's work. It is briefly this. I am convinced that what he has told is substantially true, but he has not told all the truth. There's good evidence of his having engaged in other matters of doubtful import, not alluded to in this work, particularly about Nauvoo, but the popular verdict will doubtless be that Hickman has confessed enough in all conscience, and that if each of other Danites has as much to tell, our worst opinions of Brigham Young have fallen far short of the bloody reality. John Hanson Beadle, editor.